Hello everyone, my name is Trisha Danforth. I am the Program and Exhibit Coordinator here at Nordic Northwest, and we are joined by Colin Dunphy and Sandra Nelson Miller. Tonight we will be talking about and taste testing a traditional Norwegian soup, and Sandra and Colin will be our leaders tonight, so I am going to hand it off to them.
Thank you, Trisha.
Thank you, Trisha.
Tonight, we're going to bridge almost 200 years of history to show you a very traditional soup, and we'll show you how you can take a very old, basic recipe and make it fresh for today. And so you should have received your recipes by email, I believe, or in some manner.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And that shows you the two recipes the old and the new. So you can start practicing as soon as possible. I want to step aside for a minute, letting you introduce yourself, and then I'll say a little bit more about some of the history that
Sure, absolutely.
takes us to here tonight.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I'm really glad everybody's here. I'm glad everybody's joining us tonight. I'm really excited about this. My name is Colin Dunphy. I'm the executive chef at Broder Söder. I've been with Broder for 3 years now. I've been cooking professionally for over 20 years now, and this has been by far one of the most exciting opportunities I've had for my culinary career. Scandinavian and Nordic food was something that was completely out of my wheelhouse, so learning it and understanding it and doing what I have in my experience, bringing it to it, has been a very fun and exciting time. Not only do I oversee the regular day-to-day operations of the cafe, but we also do catered events here as well, which I have a lot of experience doing, and that's also very exciting. And so I'm very happy to be here, and I'm happy that all of you guys are here too.
So, without further ado, shall we get going?
Sure.
Okay.
Let's do it.
Okay. So I want to set the stage for our soup and how I came to have this recipe. So we have to go back in time, and Trisha's going to bring out for us a little bit of historical trivia, perhaps. Go ahead, bring them both. Thank you. So Colin is holding a picture of my great-grandmother, who was born in Norway. She came from a beautiful valley called Gudbrandsdal in the region of Uppland, And she was born in 1838, and she was from farm stock. She spent some of her youth, as many young women do that are farm girls. In the summertime, the farmers would take all the cattle and sheep up to the mountains, and the young milkmaids or daughters would spend the summer up there. They would, the cattle would graze on the wonderful, fresh, tender grasses that grew up there. And so they did a lot of milking, and what they would do then is they would dig kind of like little pits, not little, some bigger pits into the ground, and then they would store the milk in containers. And it was a place to keep that milk cool, and they would then have the opportunity for the milk to survive longer, while then the young women primarily would be then turning that milk into cheeses.
That's very interesting.
It is interesting. One of the cheeses that is from that region is a very unique cheese. It's a whey cheese called Gjetost, which means literally goat cheese, because it can be made purely from goat milk, or it can be made from a combination of goat and milk from cows. So that, I am guessing that might have been one of the ones she made. So at any rate, she married and had several children, and one of those children was my grandmother, Ingeborg. Hampelaken, and she was born in 1875, and she immigrated with her two elder brothers to the United States. Fortunately, a number of years later, they were able to bring Kari and my grandmother's younger sister, and they resided in Canada for a number of years. So the whole family immigrated over time. Obviously, this recipe was handed down from Kari to Ingeborg. Ingeborg made it often. And my dad, when he married, he asked my mom to make Lapskaus. And she said, "What in the world is Lapskaus?" And he said, "Well, it's this soup, or some people would call it a stew, that my grandmother made and my mother made." And so he taught her how to make that soup. And then I learned from my mom. So it's been passed down almost 200 years. So here we go. We're going to have it.
So this recipe I was given was the traditional method that Sandra's family passed down. And as a chef in the 21st century, I kind of rewrote it as a modernized version. So you will see that there are two versions in your email. One of the is the original recipe, and then the one that I rewrote for the conveniences that we have today. So it's a very simple, rustic stew, which I really like, or soup. And so it's very easy and approachable, and it's not complicated at all, but it does take some skills that I can help you guys with to understand today. So basically, the main ingredient of this soup is beef. So in the traditional recipe, what would happen is you would make your own stock. So you would take the beef and you would boil it with onion and celery and bay leaf if it was available. And then you would pull the beef out, set it aside, discard the vegetables, cool the broth, which would then create a fat cap on the top of the broth, and they would use that to then cook the beef in. So in the times that we have now, we have stocks and broths available on the shelf at the store. So what I did for this presentation is I purchased some stew meat, which is available at almost any grocery store. Stew meat is typically like a chuck or a top sirloin. This one happens to be brisket. So that does take a little bit longer to become tender, so keep that in mind. If you're not sure which meat you have, you can always ask the butcher and they'll tell you. But brisket does take a little bit longer to tenderize versus a sirloin or a chuck roll. So we've got our diced beef here. The other main ingredients to this is what you would find on any normal farm in Norway and all of Scandinavia. So fresh onion, carrot, yellow waxy potatoes. You don't want to use russet potatoes because they become too mushy, whereas these will hold up through the cooking process. And rutabaga, also known as svids, very common in Scandinavian cuisine, similar to a turnip, but a little bit more mild. So it's, in my opinion, a little bit more palatable for most people. A lot of people don't really like turnips because they have a lot of flavor going on there. So
yeah, for sure.
You have a couple of options. You can either use, you want to start with a nice hot pan, medium to high heat, but not too hot. So you can either use olive oil or butter. If you would like to keep it dairy-free, that's completely up to you. Whichever you choose is totally fine. We're going to do a combination of both. So I'm going to add the fat to my already very hot pan. And like I said, I'm going to do a combination. It's about 2 or 3 tablespoons of olive oil and about the same amount for butter. We'll get that in there, and that's going to sizzle, which is what you want. You want it to sizzle, but you don't want it to burn. That's important. If it does get a little bit of color, that's okay. You want to move it around a little bit. You want to make sure it's all melted. And then the next step, and this is the first step, is going to be to add your beef. Now, the important part about this is you want it to be a pot big enough for the amount of meat that you have, because the idea here is you want to create a sear on the beef itself. But not only are you searing the beef, you're creating a caramelization in the pan itself. And that's what in the culinary world is known as a fond. It's a French term, which is for foundation. So you are building flavors in the pan itself by spreading this out evenly, and you want it to stick to the pan a little bit. You want that to happen because that's where that flavor, that deeper beefy flavor is going to come from. Because like I had mentioned earlier, typically the original recipe was that they would make their own stock. So that's where that deep beef flavor would come from. But you can do that at home in your own pan. So you want to keep that heat at a good medium to high temperature. I'm going to turn my pan up a little bit. Ideally, when you put the meat into the pan, it should be room temperature. That way it's going to cook more quickly and you'll get a better color on it. So at this point, you kind of just let it sit. You put it in there, don't move it around too much. You don't want to overload the pan with the beef, because what's going to happen is that the meat will begin to boil in the pan. And that's not what we're going for right now. If that does happen, though, there is a solution to that. Let it go ahead and do that. Let it get boiling like that, and then pull the meat out of the pan, and then drain that liquid that's still in the pan off. Put the pan back onto the heat, put it back on the medium-high temperature, and then put a little bit more fat into the pan, and then put the beef back into that. So while we're letting this sear, I can show you real quick some important parts about the vegetables. So I'm just going to take a rutabaga, and aka a Swede, and cut one up real quick. So the important part to this is it doesn't need to be all the same shape. The important part is that it's all the same size, because everything has to cook evenly. That's the trick to this soup, and that's the trick to most soups and stews. Everything should be consistent. In restaurants and as such, we refer to food as being fork friendly. Okay, mm-hmm. So it should fit on the spoon, so you're not trying to fight it when you're trying to eat it, right? So for a rutabaga, you want to cut the tops and bottoms off and peel it as such. All right. And you can cut it whatever shape you want. It doesn't matter. What matters is that it's the same size as everything else. So I've cut it into about a 1/2-inch slice, and then I'm going to cut another 1/2-inch slice out of that, and then simply cut it into a dice about that size. Okay? So as you can see, all the other vegetables match that size. And that's the important part to this, because that way you'll have consistency. So at this point, we're going to stir everything up over here. We're starting to get some color on our meat, which is great.
And it's smelling very good.
Yeah.
Even
and at this point, we're going to add some salt and pepper. A key thing to any cooking projects with savory food is you want to season with every step of the process. Every time you add something new to whatever you're making, you want to add a little bit more seasoning. Okay, so that's going on. So let's talk a little bit more about some variations of this while we let this meat brown up a little bit. This is a very simple soup. Most of the recipes that I found didn't have a lot of like aromatics or anything like that, because it just wasn't used in Scandinavian food, which has been a thing for me to incorporate in my approach to Scandinavian food. I like a lot of herbs, but you won't find that a lot in a lot of Scandinavian food. But if you like that, you can do that. And I had mentioned the bay leaf before, so we have some bay leaf. We can do rosemary. We can do thyme. So ideally, all of your ingredients are going to be prepped ahead of time. That way, because when you start this process, you don't really want to stop it. That's the key here. So we've got our beef going. You can see it's starting to get a little bit of color on it. And we're going to keep this going. I'm going to turn this guy up a little bit. Okay, so like I had mentioned, we have a lot of conveniences being in the 21st century where we don't necessarily need to make our own stocks anymore. But you can if you feel like doing that. So for our convenience, I did purchase stock from the grocery store. So you can use chicken stock, you can use beef stock, you can use vegetable stock, you can use water, you can use any broth that you want that would work with this flavor. It doesn't really matter. It's really up to your personal taste.
What if you were using something different, like lamb, like Icelandics do? Would you use a different broth?
Oh, yeah, you could. It really doesn't. It really doesn't matter. So yeah, this is there's an Icelandic version of the soup that's very, very similar. And I have found that, as you can see this, I have found that there is some version of this stew and soup in pretty much every Nordic and Scandinavian country. Okay, we've got our color going here. We've got our beef happening. So the next step of the process is to add your onions. Let's put those guys in there. Saute those a little bit. Stir it around. Again, add a little bit more salt and pepper to get that onto the onions. All right, so you got your onions in. And now we're going to add our carrot. So, all right, give that a little bit of stir and just let it rest. You don't need to stir it a lot. You just need to get it in there, get it evenly distributed, and make sure that you are keeping that temperature where it needs to be. So at this point, Sandra, would you mind handing me those pictures of stock over there?
You betcha.
So I'm going to use a combination of vegetable and beef broth just to enhance the flavor a little bit. But like I said, you can use chicken, you can use beef, you can use vegetable, or just water. That's totally fine too. It's your choice, whatever you want to do, really. So now that these are cooking and they're getting a little bit aromatic, we're going to go ahead and add our broth. So this is obviously a very large batch, and my understanding was that this particular soup was made in very large batches so it could be eaten over several days. So that is why this pot is so big. So, and the recipe as it's written is the amount of ingredients that I'm using right now. So you can definitely adjust it to whatever pan size you have. But it's important to use something like heavy bottomed, like a stainless steel or cast iron pan, and something shallow like this. That's very important because if it's too thin, it's going to burn and it's just not going to do what you want it to do. So, and this way it also cooks a little bit faster. All right, so we've got our broth added, and then again, add a little bit more salt and pepper. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. They might have made big batches too because families tended to be larger.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
Or maybe you were feeding some farmhands too.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got our onions, we've got our carrots, we've got our beef, we just added our broth. So we're going to let this come up to a little bit of a simmer, which takes a little bit of time. So in the meantime, we can talk a little bit about what this would have been served with. So
Okay.
you have brought a bread with us, here with us, correct?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Should we just bring the whole tray over?
Sure.
Okay. Oh, it's heavy. So we have several things here. Probably most of you who have done any Nordic cooking or eating in the past are familiar with the fact that there's lots of dry, crisp breads, unleavened breads that the Nordic countries all have. And this particular bread is called Finn Crisp, and it is very crispy. It's made from rye primarily, and it's very easy to make.
So this is Jarlsberg cheese, which is a Norwegian kind of a Gruyere. So there's the cheeses in Scandinavian cuisine are pretty basic. There's, of course, Havarti, as we all know. They're typically a white cheese. They're typically cow's milk. Sometimes there is some goat cheese. But one of the more interesting cheeses, and I use quotations because it's technically not a cheese, is this cheese right here. And how do you say the name of it again?
It's called Gjetost, which means goat cheese. And it is that's kind of a whey cheese, and the cooking process is very interesting. They actually cook it and kind of cook it down so that it becomes kind of sweet.
Right. So when you cook down butter and you separate the curds from the whey, they retain the whey, and then they cook that down and they caramelize it, and then they form it. So it's technically not really a cheese because it's not aged or going through any sort of fermentation or anything like that. So they call it cheese, but it's not. That's why it has that color, because they caramelize the what's left after you separate butter.
Yeah. And it has sort of a caramelly flavor.
It does, yes.
And for some, it's an acquired taste, and for others, it's like immediate, like this is awesome.
Sure.
You can get two kinds. This particular Gjetost is from, it looks like Ski Queen, Skiqueen, and it's in a red package, and it is 100% cow's milk, I believe. And then there's another, the same brand, and it's called Ekte Ost, which is like strong cheese. And it's a combination of the sheep, or goat's milk, and the cow's milk. And it's a little stronger flavored. I love them both. And any cheese goes so beautifully with these hard breads.
Yeah, they're very easy to make at home, but luckily, because we are in the 21st century, we have these conveniences where there's something very similar that can be purchased at the store. Some of these products include the Finn Crisp.
Mm-hmm. Looks like this. Oh, yes, okay. So, Finn Crisp, and then...
And then this Knockbrod, which is actually more Swedish in origin. It's a very unique style of bread. I'll show you what it looks like. Again, it's an unleavened product. It's more like a cracker than anything. So it is made with rye flour. So a lot of people think rye, they think caraway. That's what they associate that flavor profile with. Well, that's actually really not the case. This doesn't have a real rye caraway type of flavor profile with it. It's just a dark flour and they make it into these big wafers and bake it, and they have a specific tool. Here's one of the rollers that they use. Some of them also have specific designs on them. As you can see, there's a pattern, which is great. These are they go great with. We serve them at Broder Söder with our fish board. They're great with pickled herring. You put a lot of butter on them. That's very popular. There's a lot of butter that goes on a lot of things in Scandinavian cuisine.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah. So that's
just to point out the hole in the center. So one of the reasons you had the hole in the center was because you'd make a ton of this stuff in the wintertime, and then you would, if you had a kitchen and you could put a rod up of some, or a small tree trunk, you would put these up on there for storage. I mean, these guys have quite a shelf life. And if you happen to have had the pleasure of visiting Vogelbu, which is the wonderful old chalet on our property, you would find the crisp bread up above his stove. And honestly, I don't know this for a fact, but common sense tells me that they made these hard breads because they did last all winter long. And you didn't have access to a lot of grains and fresh produce in the wintertime, so this got you through sometimes.
Yes, I've found that a lot of the breads, specifically in Scandinavian and Nordic cuisine, don't actually contain leaveners. Back to the soup real quick. So at this point, we're getting back up to getting warm again. So now we're going to add our starchy vegetables. So we want to add these a little bit later because these starches that are in the potato and the rutabaga are going to release and go into the broth, which is going to help thicken it a little bit. So we're going to put that in there. And at this point, you have some options to add some different aromatics. So traditionally, it was pretty much just this as it is. It was the beef, sometimes shredded, but this time we're using it more of like a stew beef. The onions, the carrots, the rutabaga, and the potato. If they had bay leaf at the time, they would sometimes add bay leaf. And us being able to have other options, you could add more of a heartier herb like a rosemary or a thyme. It's really up to you. You could add it or you don't have to. It really doesn't matter. It's your choice. Like, that's one thing that I like about Scandinavian food is that it's very, very rustic. And so it's kind of up for interpretation, which makes it easy to turn it into what you want it to. Once you've gotten to this point, it's going to take a little while to get hot again, and it should only take about 15 minutes tops. To go to completion. The important part is, with my understanding, is you don't want the vegetables to be too mushy. I mean, again, that's your flavor profile. If that's what you would prefer, then you can definitely do that. The less liquid in it, then the more it would be considered a stew. Now, there are other variations of this where you can add barley. For instance, at Broder Söder, we did a Icelandic version of this, very similar, same ingredients, but with lamb. So lamb is a lot more popular in Iceland and Norway specifically than other Nordic and Scandinavian countries. So we had one on the menu over the holidays that it was basically this, but just had barley in it. And that's, like I said, entirely up to you. You know, if you add the barley, then it becomes not gluten-free anymore. So that's up to your dietary restrictions if that's what you want. Same with going all the way back to if you want to start with butter or olive oil as your fat to saute the vegetables in.
Yeah, and actually, I remember my dad. He liked he asked my mom to add barley to it too, and that did thicken it up a bit. And I have to tell you, I'm so sorry you can't smell this soup because it does smell divine.
It's very simple. That's what I really like about it, and that's what I really appreciate about most Nordic and Scandinavian cuisine is just how simple it is, but that also makes it very challenging because how do you translate that to a restaurant where people want to enjoy flavorful food? So that's been a big challenge for myself. I have been very lucky to be working with Broder and have helped develop some of the new menu items, which I'm really grateful for. So at this point, if you want to, you can add any sort of aromatics to the soup. I'm just going to use bay leaf because most people just have bay leaf in their pantry. So not too much. You don't want to overdo it too much. But if you do want to use herbs, as you can see, I've kind of tied these up into little bundles. And I find that easiest so that you don't have to pick it and chop it. That can get a little timely. So if you have twine or something similar to it, tie it up.
No rubber bands.
No rubber bands.
Okay.
No rubber bands, yes. So, all right, we're getting pretty close here. The vegetables are cooking. Everything's smelling good. So it's getting steamy. Vegetables are cooking. And again, you don't want to overcook it at first because you're most likely going to be reheating it if you make it in a large batch. And that is going to continue to cook these things. And then it's just going to become mushy. And that's not ideal for what this is supposed to be. All right. Okay. Yeah. So this just has a few more minutes to finish up. And we're going to sit down and try some. Something very popular in Nordic culture is aquavit, which I did not know much about until I started working here. It is a liquor that is popular in Nordic culture. It has many different flavor profiles. There can be dill, there can be fennel, there can be sweeter ones, there can be more bitter ones. So it's pretty traditional to cheers to the meal with your aquavit.
Skål.
Skål, yes.
Skål.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, we don't clink glasses.
Oh, I didn't know that.
At least in Sweden, you don't clink glasses.
Okay.
Okay, I don't know the tradition about akavit drinking in Norway, to be honest with you. But in Sweden, you lift your glass and you look each other in the eye and you skål.
Skål.
Skål. And then you drink.
Oof, that's strong.
Oof.
It certainly is.
Oh, honestly, my grandmother used to say oofda. You know what a joke that is?
Of course.
Of course, but she would say oofda all the time. And as I understand it, it sort of literally translates into something like well then. So it's not vulgar at all.
May I?
Oh, I would love it. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Right. So our stew is ready. We've got our crispy bread.
And I feel kind of guilty, folks, eating in front of you. I wish you could be here with us.
Yes, I do too. Obviously, we're missing some people.
Oh, do you want to?
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry. Yeah, it'll be really fun when we get back to live cook and eat because then we can all nosh together and really enjoy some community time.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I am back, everybody. There have been lots of fun comments.
Oh, good.
In the comment section. We have some hellos from Jake and Maggie.
Oh.
Oh my goodness.
So they say hello very happily. This looks really good. I don't eat meat, so I'm not going to eat any, but it looks really fantastic. And I know that Colin and Sandra were saying this too, but it smells really good.
It does smell good, doesn't it?
Yeah, and hopefully soon enough we will be able to come back in person and have everyone come and taste this delicious stuff. So
Okay.
I have some good questions.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
So Jake and Maggie say hello.
Hi, Jake and Maggie.
So just some simple ones to start off. Someone asks if you should use salted or unsalted butter.
That is a very good question. I typically use unsalted butter because then you can control the salt a little bit later down the road. And I find it just a little easier to cook with savory food. And that's my personal preference, but it's really up to you. So if you are going to use salted butter, just keep in mind that there's already some sodium going into the food that you're going to be cooking.
Oh, that's a great answer. Okay, another simple one maybe is peeling the vegetables necessary?
I find it to be necessary, yes. That is a very good question. Mm-hmm. I think that there's a little bit of bitterness in the skins, especially of rutabaga, and it just kind of presents itself a little bit better. It just looks a little bit cleaner and nicer when you do peel it.
Sandra, do you peel your vegetables when you're cooking at home?
I sure do. Yeah, I do. They get thrown in then and out into the garden.
Oh, great. This was a question, I think for you, Sandra, is how is fin crisp traditionally eaten?
You would eat it like we're doing now with a meal. You can either butter it, add cheese to it, and sometimes meats you can add, to it. So it's an accompaniment to a dinner.
Someone said that they use the big round cracker for pizza crust.
Oh, that's an interesting idea. Why not?
Why not? I mean, it's kind of a vessel, so I don't see why not.
Yeah. This
is a question from me, which is how do you all come up with the recipes that you use for your menu?
It's a group effort. I do a lot of research. I have purchased a lot of Scandinavian cookbooks, which have helped influence me. I also know that Nordic cuisine, although it is very simplistic, it does have a very traditional approach to its culinary style and how food is prepared. So that was easy for me to translate my experience with what I've done in my past and just how foods are prepared. And one of my favorite things about Scandinavian food is it's just simple foods prepared correctly. That was a mantra that was instilled upon me at a young age in my cooking career, and that translates very easily with Broder food. Yes.
And can you
salt and butter.
Salt, yes, salt and butter. And new Nordic cuisine, which has become quite internationally popular, is exquisite. I mean, it's quite simple in presentation, but very elegant. And,
it's very refined. It is elegant, and it doesn't take away from the integrity of the ingredients that are being used, which I really appreciate, and that's why I like a lot of Nordic chefs and what they're doing with the food. They really focus on the simplicity of it, because if you really think about it in a general idea, Scandinavian culture in general is very simplistic. They use what they need when they need to use it.
Yeah, and they really take advantage of what is abundant or in their world. They might go out and find their own fish or shellfish and things like that, and use them. Yeah.
We will be having a new Nordic cuisine exhibit in January 2023 through April. So,
Ooh,
yeah.
Some opportunities there.
Yeah, so there'll be lots of cooking programs coming up along with that, which is very exciting. Would you like to try the soup now?
Sure.
Oh,
I don't know
well,
if you have.
Colin, as Julia Child would say, bon appetit.
Bon appetit.
Oh, it's delicious, you guys. I am so sorry. I am so sorry that you can't be tasting this with us, but it's really yummy.
Mm-hmm. Very simple.
It looks very good.
Mm-hmm.
Very delicious.
Mm.
Well, Sandra, thank you for sharing this recipe with us.
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad I got to share it with everybody here. It's very fun. It's very simple. It doesn't take a lot of skill. It's very easy to make. Excuse me. And you just please follow the recipes that we shared with you. If anybody has any questions, they can contact us. Please feel free to email or even call Broder Söder. I'm always willing to share recipes and ideas with people, so please do so if you have any.
And I think with that, I want to thank Sandra and Colin, and want to thank everybody for coming to this lovely program.
Well, and thank you to all the people behind the scenes that have put it all together.
Yes.
It's very impressive. I'm really proud of what we've been able to do. I think maybe COVID drove us to this, but it's, you get lemons, you make lemonade.
That's right.
That's right. Or you make soup.
Make soup.
Alrighty, thank you everyone so much for
Cheers.
tuning in.
Cheers and skål.
Skål. Nope.